Can I quote yourself back to you?
Yeah.
I saw you speak a couple times in D.C. this year where you were honored by Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. You had two things you'd said, but you said, we need to turn the heat down.
Yeah.
And things got hotter since then.
I agree.
And then the other thing you said, you were talking about public lands, the public estate. And you had said, hey, if you have a hotel and it's not being managed well, do you sell the motel or do you change the management?
Exactly.
And it was, was a great point.
So I understand the frustration about mismanagement, but the solution, again, using the hotel analogy, is not sell the hotel. Let's get better management.
Mm-hmm.
And better management is going back to what? Best science, best practices, greatest good, longest term. That's the American conservation ethic that Pinchot and Roosevelt and a lot of superb scientists over the course of time have adhered to.
This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
Brought to you by First Light. When I'm hunting, I need gear that won't quit. First Light builds no compromise gear that keeps me in the field longer. No shortcuts, just gear that works. Check it out at firstlight.com. That's FIRSTLITE.com. All right, everybody, we got a very special guest today who I'll announce in 1 minute. But first off, did you just move that around, Corinne? No, Corinne didn't move it around. The Christmas tour, we still have our Christmas tour going. Fayetteville, Arkansas is sold out, but here's the run through. December 17th, we'll be in Birmingham, Alabama at the Lyric. So this is the MeatEater Live, the Christmas tour. December 18th, Nashville, Marathon Music Works. December 19th, Memphis, Minglewood Hall. The 20th is Fayetteville, but those are gone. They've been gone for a few days. 21, Dallas, Texas Theater. So Texas Theater in Dallas. 22nd, Austin, Texas at the Paramount. What's more, if you're listening on Monday for the Monday drop, on Tuesday we're having a special drop with longtime associate Ronnie Bame, who's going to tell a dog story that'll warm your little heart. Okay, joined today by Congressman Ryan Zinke. Ryan Zinke is a fifth-generation Montanan, serves as representative for Montana's 1st Congressional District. So it covers 16 counties. If you live in Bozeman, Butte, Missoula, Kalispell here in Montana, that's your man. Zinke was first elected to Congress back in 2014. He served as U.S. Secretary of the Interior under the first Trump administration. He's now serving his 4th term in Congress. First off, Congressman Zinke, I want to thank you. Again, I haven't thanked you in person. I want to thank you again for your leadership during the recent public land sales efforts, for articulating the side of it that I stand on very well. And
you mean articulating the value of our public lands, the reason why we live out west, the reason why Teddy Roosevelt is revered? Yeah.
Well, thank you, because I recognize it, that stuff has to come at some kind of cost, and but you come from a state where that stuff's cherished, and you were very vocal, up front, and laid out what your expectations were, laid out what your line was, and held firm to it. And I think we had that landed where I wanted to see it land, and all my colleagues and friends wanted to see it land, and I appreciate that.
Well, the fight for freedom is not over, and I don't think the land battle's over either.
No.
And, look, I grew up in Montana. The reason why a lot of us live out west, and I think it should be recognized too, that we live out in west from a legacy of the great ones. You had Roosevelt, you had Pinchot, you had Muir, a lot of our great thinkers in the conservation movement. We're blessed to live in an environment where we have public lands. And, the extent of our public lands, I'm a big management and a Teddy Roosevelt guy with a Pinchot. Look, on public lands, it's best use, best science, best practices, longest term, greatest good.
Mhm.
That's the model you use. And during this last dust up, there's a movement by a few that want to divest of America's greatest asset, which is our public lands. And the divesting of it, once you sell it, you're not going to get back. But there's also a process. When I was secretary, I added, I subtracted, I exchanged public lands. There's a process to it.
Mhm.
I added Sabinoso Wilderness in New Mexico. I added a number of parcels that were LWCF that provided either public access or corridors. I also subtracted around Las Vegas. There's a acronym called SNPMA, terrible acronym, but it allows areas around Las Vegas, when the county, and there's a whole procedure looking at it, to divest in sections. And look, there's sections the highest and best use of land, probably should be looked at. I'll give you an example in Montana. There's 30 acres of U.S. Forest Service property near Lima. And, Lima's a small little town, but it's right next to the school. At one time, I think the Forest Service was going to put a headquarters in there. They decided not to. It's not used for recreation. It's not used for habitat. It's just 30 acres. I think the highest and best use of that piece of property should be looked at of transferring to the school. I did the same thing on an airport that needed a little more runway. I did it on a school that needed some extra yardage. But, there's a process to it. And let me take you on a little journey because, most of the land in West was previously occupied by, a native tribe. And because a lot of that land is public land, is that they are given the right for cultural activities, for movement, for access to a lot of our public lands. When you take that out of the public domain and put it in private, those tribes, if it's a treaty, which many of the tribes are a treaty tribe, they would lose that right. And by law, you have to consult. And then let's talk about water rights. Because in the West, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. And when you divest of property, do you also divest of the underwater right? Do you divest also of the mineral rights in there? And if you're going to divest of mineral rights, you have to look at what minerals are there, what's the scope of the value, so highest and best use, but also the government, doesn't give something away for free. And also there's things like the Taylor Grazing Act. A lot of the BLM land on grazing is there at a discount because the Taylor Grazing Act makes sure that the number of cattle on public land is controlled so it doesn't overgraze. And also so we had a secure food production in this country. So when you're talking about divesting of public land, there's a whole process to it to include public comment. Just because public land is in New Mexico or Utah or Montana, it belongs to all citizens. And therefore, all citizens of the U.S. should have a comment, on it and be involved in it. So the whole process, what I didn't like about a number of things was this last assault, I think, on public lands. There was no process to it. It didn't have consultation. And a fire sale on public land, if it's for debt, you're not even on the target. You could sell everything; it's not going to reach $36 trillion.
I saw that expressed in various ways, and I expressed it in various ways where the actual money into the treasury it almost winds up being inconsequential.
There's a 1 million acre ranch in Nevada. I think they want $23 million for it. All right, and it has water, and it has buildings. It's a ranch. And then if you're talking about housing, housing is tens of acres. It's called an apartment complex. It's not hundreds of thousands of acres, and it's not, when they say family housing, it's not ranchettes. It's not luxury ranchettes. So, I think we are fortunate to live in a great country, and we're fortunate to have the outdoor experience we do, largely driven by public lands and access. Do we need to manage it better? Absolutely. Should we deem it acceptable for a forest to burn down, every season? And look, if you're a climate change believer or denier, it doesn't relieve you the responsibility of managing our public lands. Again, get rid of the dead and dying timber, put in fire breaks where they're necessary, make sure you have diversity of species, prescribe burns on the shoulder seasons rather than right in the middle when it gets hot. So I think, you look at where it is on the polling, I'd love to share it with you and the viewers, is that on the Democrat side of the equation, I think it's 98% of the Democrats oppose selling public land.
Okay.
On independents, you're in the high 80s, 89. On the Republican side, only 10% want to sell public land. The others don't know about it. When you say public land sales, is it 30 acres in Lima, or is it 3 million acres in around Glacier Park? So it is for the Republican Party. I can tell you, it would be an extinction event, because I could write the advertisement: you're giving tax breaks to the rich while you're selling public land. And it'd be true. So stop it. Let's focus on managing public land. And if you look at a parcel of land that highest and best use, there's a process to it. So go through the process, go through public comment, make sure we're not diminishing our federal estate from a point of view of public access for hunting, fishing, all those kind of things. Oftentimes exchanges, work magnificently, where some land may be in a position where you don't have public access to it all four corners are surrounded. And it may be a better deal for the public to exchange it for someplace that's next to a river or access, somewhere where you can enjoy the bounty of this great nation.
Do you mind, just by way of introduction to people that might not follow politics closely, do you mind walking through a little bit of your background? I know your family's been in Montana for a very long time, and then you had a pretty storied, you had a storied military career and were involved in a lot of
stuff.
Involved in a lot of things that a lot of people heard a lot of things about over the last 20 years.
Well, I grew up in Whitefish, Whitefish, Montana, now a destination. But when I grew up, it was a railroad logging town, smaller town, about 5,000 folks. Over a period of time, it expanded into a destination. I played football, went to University of Oregon. I was a Duck, played ball for the Ducks. But in all honesty, I played before Phil Knight wrote the check for $500 million. So I played with Daffy Duck on the side of my helmet. When I walked into a stadium, it wasn't this big fear. It was the Daffy Duck call. And then I joined the Navy SEALs. Spent 23 years. I was commander at SEAL Team 6.
Tell me real quick the inflection point. Like, why did you join the military?
Well, to be honest with you, my folks are not military. Our family. In World War I, some of them fought on the German side, and some of them fought on our side. But it was when I was at Oregon, there was a great alumni, Admiral Dick. He commanded the Enterprise during Vietnam War, and he talked to me about service, and he talked to me about the United States Navy SEALs, which he was a pilot. And he didn't lie to me, like recruiters don't lie. They may not express the entire truth. Yeah, I remember his words distinctly. He said, if you don't like it, you can leave at any time. I remember that.
He's I was on a 6-year cycle.
Yeah, as I was in Bud's training, getting tortured in the surf zone, going, you know what? Yeah, he's right. You could quit at any time. He wasn't lying. But the SEAL training is, obviously very hard for a reason. And then I enjoyed being a SEAL. I enjoyed being a commander. It's just that, the more senior you become, the less and less time you're actually in the field, and the more time you're flying what's called a D4, which is a desk with 4 drawers. Mm-hmm. And it came to the point where, I was a deputy commander of Special Forces in Iraq. My destiny was not to go back into command, but to do the staff. And there's God bless those people that want to do it. So I decided to retire. Was a state senator in Montana. And then I got this wacky idea to run for Congress, and was elected, and then served a term. Learned a lot, and then President Trump in '45 asked me to be secretary. I enjoyed that. Did that for a command tour for 2 years, and then took a wonderful absence away from Washington D.C. and then decided because we got another seat in Montana to come back, go back to the front line on the fight for freedom, and that's where I am. I enjoy representing Montana. Montana has a lot of opportunity, really really good people. Well, has some issues like every state, but I'm an optimist. I haven't seen anything that's not fixable.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some threats out there, and we talked a little about public land. I don't think that threat is doused. I don't think that campfire is doused. I think it has a chance of coming back, so we have to make sure that we do our part to make sure that it doesn't come back, and if it does, it remains unsuccessful and in Davy Jones' box where it belongs.
Yeah, you want to tell people about the Public Lands Caucus?
Yeah, so it's bipartisan. We have 20 members, 10 on each side. And
Is that normal for a caucus to be like? I shouldn't say normal because I know there's some that are both. But is a caucus? Is it preferential to be bipartisan?
There are both. There are
Yeah.
both partisan and nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan caucus because again, public lands isn't a Republican or Democrat or independent issue. It's a red, white, and blue issue. We all enjoy it. But I think it's important to have both sides of the aisle. And it's not just about selling public land, it's about management issues. We have wildlife corridors that we have to look at and evaluate to make sure we protect. We have systems, we have watersheds. What happens upstream affects downstream. And a system approach to make sure we have healthy systems, our environment. And, we live in a hyper-partisan world. As a SEAL, I fought with Americans, for Americans. I don't want to fight against Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's repulsive that there's so much anger out there that you can't have a normal conversation. And look, we should be able to agree or disagree,
Mm-hmm.
but let's not be disagreeable. And
Can I quote yourself back to you?
Yeah.
I saw you speak a couple times in D.C. this year where you were honored by Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, where I'm a board member, and you had two things you'd said. I told Corinne about them. One, you gave when you came to speak to us as a group, you talked about it. This was before it got hot, but you said we need to turn the heat down.
Yeah.
And things got hotter since then.
I agree.
And then the other thing you said is you were talking about public lands, the public estate, and you had said, hey, if you have a hotel and it's not being managed well, do you sell the motel or do you change the management?
Exactly.
And it was a great point.
My great friends from Utah, I understand the frustration about getting a ticket on a county road. I understand the frustration of being locked out of public land, of access. I understand the frustration of watching the forest burn down every year, and we burned more 2x4s last year than we ever harvested.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand the frustration about mismanagement. But the solution, again, using the hotel analogy, is not sell the hotel. Let's get better management.
Mm-hmm.
And better management is going back to what? Best science, best practices, greatest good, longest term. That's the American conservation ethic that Pinchot and Roosevelt and a lot of superb scientists over the course of time have adhered to. And I think we owe it to those that gave us the legacy to continue that process. And, kind of going back to the hyper-partisan, how do you break through? Well, you find something we both agree on, right? And then you talk about it, and then you have a working relationship, because Congress is a working relationship. It's 435 different members from different parts, but you got to work together in order to get things done. So you work together, and then if you find something that's easy to work with together, maybe the next step is finding something a little more difficult. So then it's relationships. But public land should be a rallying call for Americans, because Americans revere our public lands, and where the debate is sometimes how best to manage it. And I sit in the corner of the conservationist that's multiple use. That if kind of my background as a Boy Scout, when you have a campground, leave the campground in as good or better condition you find it. So you can mine, but we're not going to mine like Butte. We're not going to mine like Virginia Beach or Virginia City. Where you bring a paddleboard up the river and destroy the river. If we're going to mine, let's do it correctly. There's new mine techniques, and we need to mine. There's critical minerals, rare earths in Montana that are wonderful that we need, but let's do it right. Let's go through the process. Let's not skip steps, but let's go through the process and then make sure we have a reclamation plan that works. And I think all of us would get along a lot better if we looked at multiple use and management side of it. And I do agree that wilderness is set aside because wilderness are those areas with the lightest touch. But it doesn't mean no touch. I'll give you an example. In Hawaii, when I was secretary, when the Hawaiian volcano on the Big Island was blowing up, a lot of that cauldron is actually in proposed wilderness. And if you, by the letter of the law, the superintendent down there would not allow me as a secretary to put scientific instrumentation on the side of that cauldron because it was in a proposed wilderness. Now, I had to take a visit out there and relook at that. But let's say in our wilderness in Montana and the Bob Marshall. So what if you have an appearance of zebra mussels in the upper South Fork? Well, I think when zebra mussels, I think you should use scientific instrumentation out there. And I think it's okay to put a wheel in order to eradicate and eliminate the threat early enough. We have pine beetle, the devastation across. So you can use management techniques. If you don't like the sound of a chainsaw clearing trail, then maybe a couple times a year you ought to be able to use electric chainsaws and clear the trail so people have access.
We had a fisheries biologist on the show one time. Well, let me real quick just catch people up on a point here. What we're talking about is about 2% of the country is federally designated wilderness, and it sort of enjoys what I feel is for my personal opinion, enjoys kind of like the perfect layer of protection where it's non-motorized, but you can still hunt it.
Right, and
picture like a park where you can hunt. Well, it's great.
And the Wilderness Act was a great compromise between conservationists, between cattlemen, and that's why you can hunt on wilderness. That's why you can graze in the wilderness.
Fish, you can camp.
Yep. And you're limited on what you can do mechanically. You can't bring a wheel in.
Yeah. That was the fisheries biologist thing. Is they were working. I think it was in the Gila Wilderness area, and they have these strains of cutthroat trout that it's a fairly imperiled fish, and fires will destroy whole rivers. And he was talking about when they were trying to get fish stock samples, couldn't use helicopters, and they wound up, I think they fought about it a little bit, but in the end, he wound up taking pack stock and trying to figure out how to move fish with pack stock because he couldn't get a helicopter in there.
Well, but and then you got in New Mexico, you got a lot of areas where a guzzler is required, which means that there's not a lot of water out there. So there's guzzlers out there that allow sheep to have access to water.
Yeah.
So in order to make sure those guzzlers have water in them, I don't have a problem taking a truck and occasionally feeding the guzzlers so you have wildlife out there. But no.
Well,
you got to put it in a backpack, 1 gallon at a time, and stop, guys. The point is,
the argument is it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, it's a slippery. Well, you know what? But a lot of things are a slippery slope. But it's about management. It's about effective management and have some degree of common sense to things. We in wilderness, I get the lightest touch because you want to look at the majesty of nature, but nature can be pretty tough too. So if you have ravaging forest fires and it burns down every tree in the watershed, and it puts so much sediment and silt in the watershed that the fish will die. Especially if you have a species in trouble, which we do in Montana. What's the purpose? So did you prevent damage? No. What you did is you allowed it to happen. So you can do management practices. It's a scale of how much. No one's advocating, timber sales in the wilderness. But certainly, if you have a disease, if you have, in the case of beetle kill or disease with aquatic invasive species, then I think you do need to be judgment to get on it quickly and to make sure it doesn't spread.
Here's largely why. I'm not largely why. A big part of why I want to talk to you, and I'm curious how you think about things, is my personal tendency is to be something of an absolutist on wilderness protections. I have friends that are very involved in policy, very involved in the conservation world, and sometimes they'll make this argument, and you made it too, that we can't always just there has to be some compromise in order to turn the heat down a little bit. And that was some of what you were talking about, where there are people like people that advocate for public land, massive public land sell-offs, have sets of frustrations, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I'm open to, at least I'd like to hear articulations of ways in which some of those frustrations can be addressed, where we maintain the integrity of what we're trying to protect, and then therefore, as you said, turn down the heat a little bit by having an open ear and being like, okay.
And this is exactly what the Public Lands Caucus is intended to do, to turn the heat down and discuss, areas where we can agree.
And it seems like fire is a big one.
Well, fire, wildlife corridors, management, I think fishing, people, Democrats and Republicans and independents, we all hunt. We want to make sure our herds are healthy. All right, if you have, whether, pick a disease, blue tongue or chronic waste disease, there's a lot of things in there, and that's not natural. Well, is it natural, or are we going to just let it, let it go to the end, or are we going to intervene? And this is where discussion should be made. And also, the Wilderness Act, well, it was 1964. That was a product of compromise. Well, so was our Constitution. And in 1964, America was a little different. Back in 1964. We're sitting in Bozeman, Montana. I can show you pictures from 1964. I was born here in 61. Bozeman's changed since then. And sometimes you got to upgrade the plan in order to protect your assets because things have changed. What's changed in Montana during my lifetime is that when I grew up, there was never a problem with public access because there wasn't any fences. There was less people out in the woods, most people lived in town, but there was never a problem with public access or hunting, and now there's a lot more fences set up. Public access is harder to find. Corners, that's a big discussion. There wasn't any corners when I grew up because no one was there. And now it's a discussion. So looking at it, upgrading the plan. So what's important? Public access is important. System health is important. Not just a segment of the river, but the river itself. Not just a segment of the forest, but the health of the forest. And systems and wildlife corridors and flyways to make sure the systems operate. And that takes, again, going back to best science, best practices. What's the greatest good? What's the longest term? How do you manage your assets for the next 100 years? And we talked about a little about our, the legacy we were given. And I think the biggest challenge is how do we manage it for the next 100 years? Given the change that's happened since Roosevelt was president, and over 100 years ago, he faced different challenges of what we face today. We do face rural interface, forest fires, diseases, invasive species. There's a lot more on the plate about challenges, and not all of them are impossible, But I think we do got to look at innovative ways, maybe find how to protect what I think are our greatest treasures. How are we going to protect the herds? Because if you don't protect, wildlife corridors, because large game, they transit between summer range and winter range, and if that is blocked by sets of fences or highways or developments, then they lose that access to their feeding grounds too. So how do we look at the corridors? How do we identify the corridors?
Yeah, you prioritize that when you were Secretary of the Interior, and and that kickstarted, a ton of work.
Good.
Do you feel like, what do you think is going to happen with in Trump 2 with the current administration? Do you feel that there's going to be sort of a vocalization or a rededication around some of the work that you initiated on big game corridors? That conversation really came to life during those years.
Yeah, and I like Doug Burgum. He's from North Dakota, so he has kind of a western tilt to his walk. North Dakota is a little different than Montana, but I've talked to him about wildlife corridors and reorganization, which I think is important. And a lot of times, it's not more money into the system; it's better utilization of the funding. And I'll give you an example. And you got to follow me on this, but let's say you have a trout and a salmon in the same stream. Happens everywhere in the West. Let's say upstream you have a Forest Service holding, a national forest, and downstream you have a dam. I've just described every watershed in the West. So this is how we manage it. So the trout are managed by Department of Interior through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The salmon are managed by Department of Commerce through NOAA. The National Forest surface is managed by Department of Agriculture through U.S. Forest Service. Subsurface is Department of Interior through Bureau of Land Management. Our dam system downstream that directs the flow, the temperature, it's either Department of Army through the Army Corps of Engineers, like Libby, or it's Department of Interior through Bureau of Reclamation, like the dam in Hungry Horse, even though you almost can see each other. So let's say you want to redo a bridge or put a pipeline in or a dock system. You literally have to go through multiple departments with different agencies, with oftentimes conflicting regulation in 163 different regions. Even the regions don't line up. The regions from Bureau of Reclamation is not the same region as Department or Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're not even geographically the same. So it's not exactly putting more resources in. It's reorganizing it so you can make better decisions. So you don't have 7 different biologists from 7 different agencies on the same acre of ground or the same section of river giving different views and a conclusion that either doesn't move forward or it's not a consensus. And thus we're stuck in the mud and we don't get things done. Decisions, we have the technology on decisions to make a decision yes or no within a reasonable amount of time. But because just the organization of it and how we're set up, a lot of these decisions wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. If you're trying to extract a resource, there's a lot of frustration on that side. If you're trying to protect a resource, there's a lot of frustration on that side too.
Yeah.
So we can do it better.
Let's jump to one that's heating up right now. A lot of conversations about the Roadless Rule. I hate to see not hate to. I really don't want to see the Roadless Rule thrown out. I want to hear, but people know what I think. From your perspective,
all right.
From your perspective, like, aren't there some fixes and some adjustments that could be made to alleviate some of the concerns?
Yeah. So
again, I don't want to lecture people on what I think about the Roadless Rule. I think the Roadless Rule does a great job of protecting those last bastions of undeveloped landscapes. But again, in your role, here you are, you have a lot of constituents, you're answering to a lot of people with a lot of concerns. I would love to see that there was a way to more surgically address concerns as they come up, rather than just saying like, to hell with it. Which I feel like rescinding the Roadless Rule is a little bit like, to hell with y'all.
Yeah, and all right,
I'll hand it over to you.
When the Roadless Rule was put in, there wasn't any public comment on that one either. That was President Clinton. Oh, we're going to do the Roadless Rule.
Yeah, no,
I don't remember any public comment.
Yeah,
so I think there's
understand.
public comment on the way out. I think, a blanket. We're just going to undo every roadless and make them roadless again, make them roads. I think that is not best science. It's not best practices. It's not based on longest term, greatest good. I think there's no doubt some roads that probably should be opened up that provide access. Remember, not everyone is in great shape. There's a lot of older folks that they don't walk so well. That maybe would like to drive. There's a snowmobile out there. There's a lot of things, right?
I promised you I was going to stop talking about it, but here's the thing. I don't picture running out of roads. Like there's no such thing as a road preservationist, because there's always going to be a bunch of those.
Well, all right.
I'm handing it back over to you.
And let's say Northwest Montana.
Okay.
There is a lot of existing roads that when they shut the roads down, they probably should have been opened up. They went too far. And then, over a period of time, if roads overgrow and then you do have a fire, you're putting a lot of firefighters in danger, because you got to have access for machinery and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But again, the right step, I think, is, we're going to do all this or all this. I think there's a logical, midway. Let's evaluate the road system. Let's evaluate where we should have open up, public access. Because public access is important. And public access isn't always, 2 feet. I can tell you, there's a lot of veterans that would wish they had 2 legs, that can't walk very far. There's a lot of older folks that don't have the ability to walk that far, but, that they used to. And so I think you can manage it, well. But this, one side or the other, I think leads to, tension. So I do think it's important to look at public access and evaluate it fairly. Look at our roads. When they were made roadless, there was no comment. If the rule is overturned based on comment, what roads are you going to overturn? I think that's a legitimate discussion. I think we should have these discussions about where and why and what purpose. Not every place, some places have other alternative access points. And a lot of places, the road probably shouldn't have been in there in the beginning. So I do think you got to carefully look at things, and that's some of these discussions. It isn't clear where you have to have it one way or the other. Do I have to have 0 people in it or 0 machinery in a wilderness? Well, it depends on what the machinery does. If it's scientific instrumentation, like on the side of a cauldron in Hawaii, so you can evaluate the subsurface channels of lava penetrating and threatening, human life, I think that's a fair. Put that thing. If you don't like the looking at it, then make it look like a rock.
Yeah. Listen, I understand those areas, like those examples of things that happen where it winds up being, it almost becomes like those areas where like some level of absurdity is demonstrated. It drives a lot of frustration. You know what I mean?
It drives frustration.
Like in places that where, like the one I brought up where, there's almost an irony to it. Like someone trying to preserve a strain of cutthroat trout being hindered in their activities because of the Roadless Rule. So like, and then you're trying to preserve the integrity, like you're trying to work on behalf of the integrity of the very thing that's preventing you from working on the integrity or whatever I'm trying to say. Like I get those examples.
Then you have a fire, right? You have a massive fire, and you have so much settlement that the trout you're trying to protect are gone.
Yeah.
And those are real cases. So I think judgment matters,
Mm-hmm.
and have a little latitude for the commander to make a decision based on ground truth. Situation and terrain dictate. So on the roadless rule, I think it should be looked at, evaluated, public comment. There's no doubt that there are some places that the roads network should be replaced, probably repaired. So if you do need to get in there with fire trucks and equipment, you can, so you can evaluate it and enjoy your public land because it's yours. Snowmobiles, across Montana. I've never seen a problem or damage from a snowmobile during the summer. And I hike a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Unless a snowmobile hits a tree, it doesn't do a lot of damage out there. And the four strokes are pretty quiet. And quite frankly, the game, if they're up that high where the snowpack's that high, the game is not there.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, you hunt.
And I have a couple snowmobiles.
You do.
Wild and scenic river work. So you recently, I'm a little lost on how the process plays out, but proposing wild and scenic status for stretches on the Gallatin and Madison. What does that do? Give me your thinking on that. What does that do? Is it a symbolic gesture?
No, all right. It's looking at the Gallatin and those basins in the Madison. One is that when you put protection on rivers, so your setback, making sure the flow remains, etc. In the case of the River Act, it started at the county level. They first came to my office in D.C., a group behind it, and said, "Oh, we got this great plan. We're going to do all these rivers, thousands of miles of rivers, going to put them on protection." I said, "Well, what do the counties think about it?"
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, we haven't talked to county commissioners." Well,
going right to the big dog.
You know what? I'm a congressman, former secretary. I go to the county commissioners because the county commissioners are the front line.
Uh-huh.
The sheriff is voted in, the county commissioners are voted in. They're the front line. And if you want my support, you got to go to the county commissioners and get their support too. And they did. Good on them. They went in, they worked it, they got county commissioners, they adjusted the scope where you had all sides. You had the government side, with me, and you had the county commissioners, and you had the local enthusiastic groups. And there are a lot of them that all got together and said, "This is the right plan." And then, because I'm a representative and I represent people, and I'm glad to do it, if everyone agrees, you know what, we'll go forward, because I also think it's important enough to make sure that your kids have the same experience on the Madison and the Gallatin as you did. The reason why we live in Montana is because the Gallatin isn't the Sacramento River.
Mm-hmm.
That we understand how important it is on flows and temperature and species and riparian banks and all that, should be and looked at as part of Montana, our legacy that we're going to also leave behind for the next generation. So I'm glad to do it. The process is it starts in the House. We'll get a committee hearing on it. It's not a contentious issue because I think we did it right. We went at the front line, and it's front line driven. And then I'm sure that Senator Sheehy and Daines will pick it up on that side. So I'm actually fairly optimistic that the scope is right. It got a consensus on it, and it protects two beautiful rivers that I think that you and I spend a lot of time on, rightfully so, because they are gorgeous rivers, and I just want to make sure that, again, your kids and your grandchildren can have the same experience.
What's the timeline on something like that look like for that process?
Well, we're in government shutdown right now, so I'm sure not much is moving at the moment, but I'm pretty optimistic that it'll move forward. Things take time. Good things take more time, but I think we're on a good roll because we did it right.
Yeah.
On
right meaning that
procedure, how to do it,
that local buy-in and
absolutely.
County commissioner angle. Yeah.
People in Utah got really upset when monuments were put in place that they had no say. Matter of fact, not only did they not have a say, they had just the opposite. They were staunchly against it. Mm-hmm. Both the state House, the state Senate, the representation, all were against that, and yet happened. And you gotta be sensitive to states' rights, even though it's federal property, and monuments for everyone's listening. the president's authority to designate a monument. Teddy Roosevelt really pushed it, and it's called the Antiquities Act, and it's delightfully short. It's only about a page, and it has 4 conditions. One, you have to have an object to protect.
Mm-hmm.
That object, by law, by definition, is historic, prehistoric, or geologic. Example, historic would be battleground, geologic, the Devil's Tower.
Yeah,
which, by the way,
that's the one I was going to throw out there.
That's the first monument by Teddy Roosevelt.
I visited that place. Yeah.
Amazing. And secondly,
it's very understandable when you look at it.
Yeah, it's like, yeah,
I know where you're going. You're like, where it's like that thing.
Yeah, well, and the monument at the time was 1,200 acres.
Yeah.
So there's a pushback as a land grab. But again, you have to have something to preserve. Secondly, it has to be on federal land. You can't designate a monument on state or private land.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be federal. So some of the recent designations of monuments also were on state and private land, which is illegal. And I think also importantly,
well, because those places were encompassed within the
encompassed. But what happens is you start restricting access. You start changing prescriptions on grazing, on time, and so you put a lot of pressure on either the state for income, because a lot of state properties like Montana, best and highest use, the schools generate income from the property, or as your private land rights, you do have some right to the enjoyment of your property, and when that's diminished because of a government, either it's a action, then that's a taking. But lastly is smallest area compatible to protection of the object, and that's important. For instance, if you're going to designate a battlefield, a monument, then it would be logical, and the extent of that battlefield would be where the battle took place, or very close by. It's not, in the case of Bears Ears, which was a famous one, it's not 1,500 square miles.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, well, 1,500 square miles, and for listeners that remember Bears Ears, it was.
Oh, this is quite a toss.
Oh, yeah. So President Clinton went in and he designated Bears Ears. I didn't see the property. But Bears Ears was about 1,500 square miles, of which 800,000 acres was wilderness. Now, tell me in a wilderness what protections in a wilderness you don't have. None. And then there was an entirety of a national forest in there that had no monuments. I mean, it had no areas of known existence of anything historical. No Indian artifacts, no dwellings. What it was there could be.
Mm-hmm.
There could be. What is that? So you can't designate a monument of what could be. And it's smallest area compatible. So when I did a review with the state of Utah and with the governor and locals, I looked at it and I made the recommendation to then President Trump is that on the 800,000 of wilderness, return it back to wilderness. It has all the protection it needs. On the national forest, return it to national forest. The rest of it, a reasonable boundary, and the boundary that I recommended was larger than Bryce Canyon and Zion Park combined.
Mm-hmm.
And still, there was pushback from it. But at the end of the day, it was the right decision. You got to follow the law on monuments. Same thing with
because you got absolutists, like you got absolutists, like I'm kind of you got absolutists like me who would look and be like, maybe I'm gonna admit like a certain level of manipulation here, where you'd look and you'd be like, I like the goal. I like the goal of preserving untouched landscape, and if this is how we got to get there, then this is how we got to get there. And I understand that winds up, being something that's legally exposed.
Yeah, and
It's an approach that's legally vulnerable, as we see with a lot of these ping pong issues that aren't acts of Congress.
Well, and it's interesting with Bears Ears. You have two sections of the Great Navajo Nation. The Navajo Nation in Utah was against the monument, primarily because they didn't want notoriety. They do a lot of ceremonial, events on that land, and they were staunchly against the monument. The Navajos in Arizona, where you just had the opposite view, they wanted the monument, and they viewed the monument as a step towards a national park, or they viewed the monument as a step towards a reconciliation of a land return.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of their view. At the end of the day, I viewed it in the terms of what was written in the law, is that yes, there's Zuni, there's a lot of historical and geological features that I think they would qualify. I wasn't President Obama, so I gave President Obama deference. I wasn't president, he was. So he decided that he would sign it, and so I gave deference of it within the law. But again, the boundaries that I proposed, is still in litigation, by the way, were larger than Zion and Bryce Canyon combined. There's not 1 inch, by the way, that left the federal state. Not 1 inch of land left the federal state. Is how it was designated and for what use and when. But that's an example, and I think you rightfully brought it up. There's people that will give no quarter on either side because either they think it's a slippery slope or the government doesn't have the right or states' rights. There's a lot of people that are lined up that get angry when you even have a discussion about it. And this leads to the large thing is we need to get the anger out of the discussion. It's a distraction of getting things done. And look at what's the purpose. The purpose is to maintain and preserve and protect our outdoor legacy, to improve public access where we can, and to manage our forests and our wildlife to make sure that the herds are healthy into the future and our forests remain the same. That's the goal, right?
Yep.
And how do you reach the goal? Well, you work together to do it. You look at threats, and there are. You identify what's the source of the threat. Why do people want to sell land? Why are people so angry? Is it because of housing costs? Well, housing costs are high, but in housing, let's say you have $1 million home, which in Bozeman, it's hard to believe it. There's hardly any home that's not $1 million. But look at $1 million home.
Someone coming from.
Yeah.
So I'm not like picking on them, or I'm just pulling a state out of thin air. Like someone coming from Missouri, and if you said, "Hey, point out the $1 million homes," well, they're not going to be pointing out the $1 million homes.
Yeah, and even in Missouri, so 40% of a cost of a home is permitting, and permitting includes curbs and sewer and water and that, right. Then you have construction costs. Materials are not coming down. Then you have to have some profit. And then you have land costs. Of that group, land costs generally and oftentimes are the least, the least expensive part. And again, we talked about if it's public housing we want, that's tens of acres. It's not hundreds or hundreds of thousands of acres. Yeah. Right. And if the purpose is to provide housing, then yeah. But if you don't have infrastructure, then building a house in the middle of a dirt farm without water and sewer is not going to get you very far. So you have to look at it and evaluate what's the purpose. Again, if you sell land, public land, once you sold it, it's gone. You're not going to get it back. George Will said that you're not making any more land. So I think again the point is I think you have to look at things, evaluate highest and best use, and go back to the American conservation ethic that got us to this point of why we have the federal estate we do.
I want to move to one where I believe you and I are in perfect agreement.
That's scary.
Grizzly bear delisting.
Absolutely.
And why it fits in with some of the theme of what we're talking about. For listeners, grizzly bears were listed for Endangered Species Act protection very early on in the act. When they were listed, we mean the American people, all the system agreed on what recovery would look like. They put numbers to it. Grizzly bears reached that agreed upon recovery threshold 30 years ago.
Yep.
I'm a little bit lost in time. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they hit the numbers that everyone agreed would be recovery. A thing about the Endangered Species Act, I think that only 2% of the things that go on the Endangered Species Act come off because they're recovered. Things might come off because we realized they were extinct. Things might come off because we realized that they weren't actually warranted in the first place. But rarely does an animal, just rarely do we recover an animal. We did it with peregrine falcons. We did it with bald eagles. When bald eagles hit recovery, it was a big celebration. They were removed from the Endangered Species Act protection. But somehow with grizzlies, we hit recovery and they won't delist them. And speaking to the frustrations is it winds up making a mockery of the Endangered Species Act. And it turns the Endangered Species Act into a thing where people hear it and they reflexively go, oh, brother.
Yeah.
It breeds the frustration because you're like, we set a plan, we achieved the plan, and then someone says, nope, I'm moving the goalpost because I don't want to live in a world where someone might do something bad to a grizzly bear. So I no longer care about what the act intended. I just care about using it as a legal weapon to protect my own personal interests.
Well, and the Endangered Species Act, by the way, Dick Nixon signed it. People forget about that. Yeah, Dick Nixon signed Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. It was all Dick Nixon.
No, it's unbelievable.
Now he had Democratic Congress, but Dick Nixon. All right, he's the one that signed it.
I had someone the other day explain to me that he didn't actually care about any of that stuff, and I didn't look into it.
I don't know. He signed it, but on 2 points. One is when, as you rightfully point out, the Endangered Species Act, the solid idea about it is absolutely essential to protecting species and make sure we leave a legacy, but it can be abused. And when it is abused, that creates anger and frustration.
Mm-hmm. And people just want to be done with the whole damn thing.
And it spills out into other species, right? Because if they see the grizzly bear, which has recovered, I mean, if you go to Volcano, every outbuilding has hot wire on it. They had a tourist camping right next to the restaurant and got mauled and killed.
By the post office.
You see it. You can't go out there on a bike anymore with a BB gun. We have too many grizzlies. There's the right number of grizzlies. Let's go by science and manage the grizzly. And then they've somehow concocted. Now there's 3 separate species of grizzlies. There's the continental. There's the greater Yellowstone, and there's the yak. And each of those are different. The study was completed on the greater Yellowstone. That population has recovered. When I was secretary, I led the effort, took it off the list, and then it was put back on the list when I left. The continental, that study has recently been completed. That species has recovered, and those are the ones that are in Ovando in the Northwest. And the yak, that was never endangered because the way the Endangered Species Act is, you only count the ones that are in North America. You only count the ones that are in the United States. Mm. We're blind to the ones that are in Canada. Well, the northern or the yak grizzly, only a small section of their habitat is actually in the U.S. Most of the habitat is north. But all of a sudden, if the numbers in the south, the smaller section where they live, if that numbers can't promulgate the entire species, then they remain on the list.
Yeah,
and it's nuts
with no acknowledgement of the habitat.
With
to the
no
north
acknowledgement,
of the line.
and you got. And if you've been up there, the forests are dead. They have the canopy. Everything below the canopy is dead because the tree density is too great. They're dead and dying trees. There is no grasses. Grizzly bears don't eat grass. and ungulates do. But unless there's grass, there's nothing to feed on. Pretty much they're having to transit hundreds of miles for food. And their food oftentimes in the Northwest and Libya happens to be a garbage can because garbage cans are available because there's no food out there. But it's a management issue, and we should celebrate that the species has recovered. I mean, we all should do a barn dance and celebrate, and then go, all right, these are the numbers. We're gonna monitor that species very closely. It's just off the list. This is the numbers that we're going to target it to and manage, just like we manage elk herds, we manage cattle, we manage things. The only two things we seem not to manage are grizzly bears and wild horses and burros.
Yeah.
And both of them become.
Dude, I didn't even put that on our list, but that's another one. But we'll not. We can avoid that one. But let's stay on grizzlies for a minute, because one of the things, like being an optimist, try to be an optimist. I look and I'm like,
I'm an optimist. We should be.
Well, I look and I'm like, you got Republican. You got a Republican governor in Montana. You got a Republican governor in Idaho. You got a Republican governor in Wyoming. We have a Republican delegation. We have a Republican in the White House. I'm like, perhaps in the next 4 years would be it seems like everything's really aligned to delist the grizzly bears and hand them back to state management. Is that enough time, or is it just too legally complicated?
No, I think we should and can. We have a little problem with a couple judges.
Yeah, it's like a person.
A person
in Missoula, right?
A person in Missoula. Yeah, he's from Malta.
I know, but it's like a god. It's like a godlike position.
Yeah, every time it's always moving the bar. But I look, you don't give up. It's the right thing to do because the numbers and the science behind it is truthful. So I do think, and it's not Republican, Democrat. That's not really, quite frankly, the way I see the world. I'm kind of a red, white, and blue guy.
I know, but what I'm saying is
the powers should align to get things done where you don't need.
Yeah, I would without
corner.
Fully understand. I know everybody has their own priority, but I was just saying when I looked at it, I'm like, that would be a great outcome here. There's be other things I care about that will be compromised, but would love to see this come through. But it's like you move to delist. Like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service moves to delist, then they make a plan, but then it just gets litigated, right?
Yeah, and I would say that's part of the issue is Congress has to do our job to make sure that there is an off-ramp based on science on the Endangered Species Act. But when it's abused, it creates anger on both sides. One is that you are thinking about taking an animal off the list, so I'm angry about that. And you're not taking the animal off the list because it's recovered. I'm angry about that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's always better to look at what's the goal. The goal is independent of opinion. The goal is to have a healthy number of species, but make sure the species that was identified, once it meets that objective, then it's off the list. Congress has to do our job to make sure that once those numbers have been verified, that in fact it gets off the list and doesn't get litigated for another series of discovery. Well, what about the relationship between the monarch butterfly and the grizzly? Have you looked at that?
Yeah.
No, I haven't looked at it.
That's always the play. The play is not to question how many bears are out there. The play is to go but did you consider this? But did you consider that?
Discovery.
But did you consider this?
Yeah.
It's never like, hey, there's not actually enough of them. It's always like it's like a technicality.
And we also reward lawsuits because if you bring a lawsuit forward, and you have 11 tenants of that lawsuit, and you lose on 10 of them, but win on a minor one, you're still going to get fully funded. Mm-hmm. So our taxpayers, pay for this nonsense. Enough's enough. We're $36 trillion in debt. I can see a lot better expense of taxpayer dollars than to defend a species that, by all numbers and by science, has recovered. Enough's enough. But Congress has to adjust it to make sure that the abuse is stopped.
So if you crystal balled it, when will that happen? I mean, we eventually got there on wolves, right? It took a long time. We got there on wolves, at least in the northern Rockies. The northern Great Lakes are still dealing with the problem.
And Colorado is just being introduced to the problem, and they're not very happy about it.
Yeah. But what are the odds, or not, however you want to put it? Like, what are the chances that we would see grizzly delisting in the next handful of years?
Well, you have influence.
I've been talking about this since I was young,
but you're not giving up on it. Yeah, look, you don't give up. That's a seal. You never quit. With Danes and Sheehy and Montana, the four of us, it's certainly a priority. I think probably the number one priority is peace, but after peace, the environment. I'm an optimist. It can get done. I think Burgum understands the importance of it, and if you're in New York or Florida, grizzly bears probably aren't at the top of your list. But look, we
black bears are.
Black bears. Think of a bigger black bear, a lot bigger. But this is where the four of us we get along well. We talk at least once, if not twice, a week. And I'm pretty confident we'll see the greater Yellowstone grizzly go off the list. I think it won't be too long before the continental and the yak. We're going to have to change the law so we can. It's ridiculous if you have, again, if your habitat is just a small area, but absent of boundaries.
Yeah.
If the preponderance of the bears live up in Canada, then there should be some formula to have some compensation for those bears. 'Cause a lot of them are coming from Canada and coming down, eating and returning.
I'm trying to resist the urge to give listeners my standard 30-minute explanation of distinct population segments. But when Congressman Zinke's talking about the Northern Continental Divide, the Greater Yellowstone, basically it's a geographical sort of system by which we point out areas that could potentially even have grizzlies or that have suitable habitat. So instead of talking about grizzlies in Golden Gate Park, where there were grizzlies once upon a time, we're talking about the places where there's suitable habitat and the potential for a population that.
Yeah, and then they go, well, is it a subspecies? Is Greater Yellowstone so much different than the continental and the yak? The answer is no. And then if you got to go to another subspecies, there's a subspecies. If you go further out in Montana, there's a cornfield out by Chester that the grizzly bears have gone all the way out to Chester.
It's the cornfield grizzly.
Sit in that cornfield, more or less all fall. Now that could be a subspecies too. It's the corn grizzly.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm being facetious, but
no, I understand. There is a tool. There's an environmental tool that gets used where if someone, you might point out like, hey, this species is imperiled. And people will say, well, it's not because they're all over the place. And then what you do is you say, well, this one's a little different.
Well, and it
could, it's like there's like splitters and lumpers in taxonomy.
If you're worried about DNA, then they're doing transplanting, programs, and they'll grab a bear from one area and send them to another bear. If you're worried about that the gene pool is beginning, so reduced,
like a stud program,
et cetera. But it goes back to science. But I'm an optimist on that. The endangered species, you need 60 votes in the Senate. That's one of the hurdles. So it has to be bipartisan. And I think a vehicle for that is we should have the discussion in the Public Lands Caucus. That's very, very bipartisan and very full spectrum, by the way, of political tone. From the ultra-conservative to the ultra-liberal. But the common thread is public lands.
Yeah.
And both sides are deeply passionate about public lands. The management is a little different in the perspective of how to manage it, but they're passionate. That's a great start. At least people are passionate about the team. A lot of people are passionate about the Bobcats until the Grizzly Bobcat game.
I'm gonna tell you
Montana.
something that I don't want you to take personally. You and I don't agree on everything, but I don't agree with my wife on everything.
Well,
So you're in her company.
Yeah, I'll give you a hint. I don't agree with myself all the time. Ask my wife. So, but but again, it helps if a person has passion, right?
Yeah.
And it also helps to listen.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to end on here. Is a thing that I've appreciated, being one of your constituents. The thing I've appreciated about you is you cultivate, intentionally or naturally, you cultivate a tonality that implies compromise, that implies giving people the benefit of the doubt, that implies like, let's hear all the ideas, may the best idea win. You point out, we're talking about red and blue. You point out being red, white, and blue, right? You talk about taking the heat down. Like, dude, this is stuff that I love to hear. I haven't read the article yet. I saw a thing this morning that it was a poll. I didn't read any of the details of the poll. Who did the poll, I don't know, but just said in a poll, most Americans think that the divisions in this country cannot be resolved, which is just sickening to hear that. What's your take? I mean, you go out of your way to, like you said, you go out of your way to take the heat down, and you go out of your way to like be a gentleman and to point out this is America. Let's figure things out amicably. Like, how do you keep that up?
Well, and how do you get the tone and the anger out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's leadership. Leadership at every level. The school teachers should be talking about tone. Let's celebrate our diversity of thought. Let's celebrate critical thinking, and let's celebrate solution-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
Let's celebrate our ability as a great nation to get things done. But I think it has to happen both from the top and also from the bottom up. And anyone that has a voice, I think, should be saying the same voice. Related is a Charlie Kirk incident. Terrible. Anyone that would celebrate the death of a father or celebrate the death of a husband over political dissent is a real problem.
Yeah.
And where are they getting that from?
I don't know, man. My kids would come home from school and they would tell me insane things that were being said at school. I'm like, listen, my kid's in speech and debate. I'm like, that man was killed at a debate where he's inviting the people that disagree with him most to come up and share their opinion. He was killed at a debate.
To your point, he advocated debate. He advocated, you prove me wrong on an intellectual capacity.
And whoever disagrees most is the front of the line.
And have at it. But it was an event of communication, of deliberation, of debate. It should never resolve to violence. And I can tell you, this is not my first rodeo. The anger out there is a distraction from getting things done.
Yeah.
When you have anger, it doesn't allow a conversation on affordable housing. It doesn't allow a conversation on economics and prosperity and how to break through an environment that's really difficult for especially young people to get a job and get a house. How do we address that? When there's so much anger, you can't even have the discussion. And if you want to talk about affordable housing, let's talk about things like title. When you buy a house, you don't buy a house, you buy a title, right? And it's the title.
My wife handles all this stuff.
Well, it's the title you buy and sell, right? And so we should look at, how do we open up so people can have access to a title? Is it 6-plexes, 8-plexes? Is it condos, making it easier for people to own title? Because that's what gains equity and sell. But if your life is destined to rent the entirety of your existence, that's a change from the American dream, right? The American dream is a couple cars, a house, send the kids to school. They're gonna have more opportunity than you did. Diminishing it, it's probably not possible to, if you live in New York City, to buy a building or a block, but you can buy a long-term lease on an apartment with title and sell that. So there's other ways to do it, but you can't get there if you're so angry you clench your fists and you shut off your ears, and all you're going to do is become angry. And I've been a SEAL. I've seen a lot of things in my life. I've seen the very best of humanity, and I have seen the worst. I have absolutely seen the worst in humanity. But I remain an optimist that always good will prevail. And one of the nice things about it is that I live in Montana. We're here in Bozeman, so sometimes the problems are over the horizon. They're a concern because they're over horizon, but in this country. And I think the only way to address it is that we all should address it, because we all rise and fall in the same tide. And go to the neighbor you really dislike and say hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about divisions making it that we can't get projects done. I just worry about divisions that make it that we can't get the American experience done, the American experiment done. I don't know, man. I just been like really tore up about.
I think it should be a concern.
It really hit with the death of Charlie Kirk. It was like not just that tragedy, but sort of the mindsets that came out of that, and some of the opinions that came out of that.
Stunning.
It hit me like a I've been having like a little bit of an emotional crisis about just since those days. It's been hard since those days.
But
not just I feel bad, I feel terrible for the person's family, but the symbolism of it, and this idea that people would come out and act like they were glad about something like that, and then the way that it would just be leveraged by everybody, and the way the motivations of the shooter would be leveraged. I don't know, man, it just made me feel sick. I still feel kind of sick from it.
But we should feel sick because it's one. It should be unacceptable, and sometimes we're a loss of words. But I think it's a value to reflect, and it's only evil if we don't change. And maybe. There's not much of a silver lining in Charlie's death, but maybe it will give us a moment of reflection, a watershed moment. Say we don't want to be that country.
Yeah,
we don't want to have shootings on political disagreements. We don't want to have anger because what does it result in? It results in the dismantling of a great nation, dismantling of our fabric as Americans. We are bonded by one nation under God. So we should hopefully we rally. I'm seeing some signs of it. It's my prayer that we don't snap back to where we were, that we actually move forward on it, and his death will have some positive outcome. If from it, it's only positive if it's recognized. And we change our tone and actions to it, and that has to come from everybody. It didn't happen overnight. This anger was allowed to brew. In some cases, it was promoted.
Yeah.
Calling someone a Nazi 3,000 times on TV. Eventually, someone goes, "Oh, it must be a Nazi," because you said, like, "Is it just I understand freedom of speech, but you can articulate." And like my mom said, you can use your words.
Yeah, I told my kids, I'm like, when all this is going on, I was like, hey man, I have opinions that are controversial. I'm an outspoken hunter, which in some people's minds is controversial. I go to colleges, give talks, and talk to people.
I hear you kill animals.
Well, I imagine, I'm saying, if someone, I told my kids, someone shoots me at a college campus, there's going to be people that are like, well, he deserved it. And I'm like, how are you going to feel in that moment?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, I don't want to keep railing on about it. I'm sure glad you came by to talk.
Well, here's some good things. As that the spirit of Americans. We're all Americans, and I've seen humanity at its worst, and I've seen humanity at the best. We have an opportunity to make sure we learn from this and move on. And I think if leadership across the board on both sides of the aisle, and there's probably 3 or 4 different sides in the aisle of folks out there, but all of us should recognize and push back on it. And I'm seeing that with a lot of tone of the media, people that are in the influence world say the same thing, talk about it. Not all, but I'm seeing some good signs. And hey, life's not perfect. You wake up in the morning, do the best you can. You influence those things you can influence, and accept kind of the things you can't. You don't quit. You don't give up. You're passionate about your ideas, and you kind of associate sometimes with people that are also passionate.
Yeah.
And it's not so bad to once in a while to go out and meet someone that you would normally not have a conversation with. In the House, believe it or not, I'll go over the Democrat side of the aisle. I'll sit down, and I have a group of people with distinctly different backgrounds than mine. Sit down. I have conversation with it. I've learned about the Deep South a lot from conversations.
Listen. I watched you. You don't know this. I watched you do this.
Yeah, I'll go around.
I watched you go up and out of your way and engage with, of all things, a Democrat. I watched you go across the room and do it.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. I have a lot of friends that are Democrats too. But
I saw that and I appreciated it, man. I appreciated it.
Well, I don't think our problems are going to be solved from one side of the aisle or the other. I think the problems, it's always the kind of the middle lanes that look at it, and most people, just want government to function. And they just want to cover the basics and make sure you have a functional government, and the resources are put where people need them. I think there's a Christian aspect of it. Look, if someone's hurting, then you shouldn't walk past. You should provide some help. A handout is always better or a hand up is better than a handout. But in some cases, people just aren't able to be. They're going to make a lot of mistakes in life, and they're going to continue to make mistakes. So what do? You either incarcerate them, or you try to provide some opportunity to reform. I'm a redemption guy. Try to put them in a program where they work and at something. Everyone can do something, and work is healing. Work provides purpose a lot of times, self-worth, evaluation. So get them in something that they feel good about, even if it's picking up garbage. I pick up garbage. I clean toilets at parks. I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Well, Congressman Zinke, thanks for coming on, talking about conservation issues, talking about American patriotism. I appreciate it.
And just around the block, I always enjoy it. And thanks for what you do, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I think you're insightful. I think you drive the issues. You have a great following for a reason. Is that I think you bring up some hard hitting issues, and probably most of all, I understand you're a pretty good hunter.
I got friends that point me in the right direction.
I heard you got a good scope too.
All right. Well, thank you very much.